friends, colleagues, and fellow citizens, let's begin with an uncomfortable truth. The question is no longer whether the United States and China will clash, but how profoundly that clash will reshape the world economy. Well, for decades, we have been told that global trade and economic interdependence would prevent great power conflict. Yet today, the two largest economies, China and the United States, stand locked in a tense economic rivalry that many fear could ignite the very war humanity dreads. But the real story is deeper than headlines about warships or tariffs. It is about the economic system itself, capitalism, pushing nations toward confrontation. First, consider the roots of this rivalry. Both nations operate inside the same global capitalist framework, a system that rewards endless growth, competition, and profit maximization. The United States, the long-time economic hegemon, views China's meteoric rise as a direct threat to its dominance, especially in technology, finance, and global supply chains. China, for its part, has blended state planning with market mechanisms to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty. But that success does not shield it from the pressures of capitalist competition. It must continually expand its markets, secure resources, and defend its trade routes. The logic of capitalism, grow or die, is not an American invention. It is the system's DNA. Second, let's look beyond the military posturing. The so-called war is already being fought economically through trade wars, currency battles, and technological embargoes. The United States restricts access to high-end semiconductors. China responds by seeking self-sufficiency. Each side frames these moves as defense, but both are playing the same game, protecting profit and power. Third, ask yourselves, who pays the price? Ordinary working people in both nations, and indeed across the world, bear the burden. Supply chain shocks, inflation, and job insecurity ripple through the global economy. The rhetoric of nationalism hides the reality. This is a contest between rival capitalist elites, not a war for the well-being of ordinary citizens. Here lies the hook I urge you to grasp. The true war is not between the United States and China. It is between a global economic system that breeds conflict and the urgent human need for cooperation. If we continue to accept capitalism's competitive imperative as natural, we will keep reproducing these conflicts, whether between China and the United States today or other powers tomorrow. But if we challenge that system by expanding worker cooperatives, by democratizing economic decision-making, by prioritizing human need over private profit, we begin to disarm the real engine of war. The escalating rivalry between the United States and China has become the defining drama of our time, a contest that stretches far beyond the surface of trade statistics or military posturing. What we are witnessing is not a fleeting disagreement between two large nations, but a structural clash of economic titans that shapes the global order itself. The United States, long accustomed to holding the commanding heights of world power, now faces a competitor whose rise has been nothing short of breathtaking. China's transformation from a largely agrarian economy to the world's second largest economic power in just 4 decades is not merely a remarkable success story. It is a direct challenge to the assumption that U.S. dominance is permanent, and that, more than anything else, is what makes this rivalry so volatile. Consider the numbers that fuel the anxiety in Washington and in capitals across the world. China has sustained growth rates that the United States and Europe can only envy. It has become the world's largest exporter, the key manufacturer for industries ranging from electronics to pharmaceuticals, and a formidable investor in high-speed rail, green energy, and next-generation technologies. Its Belt and Road Initiative, spanning dozens of countries, is more than an infrastructure plan. It is a strategic blueprint to bind the economies of Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe into long-term partnership with Beijing. The United States, once the uncontested architect of global trade rules, now finds itself watching as China writes its own rules and builds alternative institutions. The hook here, the point that should command your attention, is that the global economy is no longer organized around a single center of power. We are living through the birth of a multipolar world, and such moments in history have always been fraught with tension. Washington's concerns are not only about economic metrics, they are about influence, prestige, and the ability to set the agenda for the future. From Silicon Valley to the Pentagon, policymakers view China's rise in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and 5G networks as a potential eclipse of America's technological edge. In finance and trade, the yuan's gradual internationalization threatens the dollar's unique status as the world's reserve currency. Each of these developments chips away at the U.S. long-held position as the indispensable nation. And so the response has been swift trade tariffs, technology bans, military alliances across the Pacific, and a steady tightening of strategic partnerships with nations wary of China's ambitions. Yet every measure of containment provokes an equally determined countermeasure from Beijing. The result is an escalating cycle of competition, one that feels increasingly like a Cold War with 21st century characteristics. But let's look even deeper, because the most captivating truth is not found in headlines or in the daily exchange of diplomatic barbs. What really drives this rivalry is the very logic of the global economic system itself. Capitalism rewards expansion, it demands growth. It pushes every major economy to seek new markets, secure critical resources, and protect supply chains at all costs. The United States cannot willingly cede the dominance it has held for nearly a century, and China, propelled by the momentum of its own growth miracle, cannot simply slow down without destabilizing its social contract. This is the economic engine of the rivalry. Two powers compelled by the same system to compete relentlessly, even as the world trembles at the possibility of their confrontation. Here is the stark hook you must not miss. The contest between these two superpowers is not merely about ideology, nor is it confined to the Pacific Ocean. It is the heartbeat of a global transformation, the struggle that will define the balance of power for decades to come. Whether you watch from New York, Beijing, or anywhere in between, this rivalry is reshaping the rules of trade, the flow of technology, and the future of peace itself. Economic warfare between the United States and China is no longer a hypothetical scenario. It is the new reality shaping the 21st century world order. Without a single shot fired, both nations have turned markets, technologies, and supply chains into weapons of influence and defense. The hook that should immediately capture your attention is this: every tariff imposed, every export ban announced, and every currency move made is not just an isolated policy, it is part of a grand strategic contest where economics has become the battlefield and financial leverage the weapon of choice. What makes this struggle even more gripping is that it unfolds in plain sight, affecting the prices we pay, the devices we use, and the stability of the global economy itself. It began with the trade wars that erupted publicly in the late 2010s when Washington imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods and Beijing responded in kind. At first, many analysts dismissed these skirmishes as a negotiating tactic to secure better trade terms. But the persistence and expansion of these measures revealed something deeper, a structural rivalry that cannot be solved by a single agreement. The tariffs were only the opening volley. Soon after came a series of high stakes restrictions aimed at cutting China off from the most advanced semiconductors and the equipment needed to produce them. These chips, the tiny brains of modern technology, power everything from smartphones to military systems. By choking access to the highest levels of chip making, the United States sought to slow China's technological ascent while simultaneously investing heavily in domestic manufacturing through initiatives like the Xi-Pass and Science Act. Beijing, in turn, accelerated its own massive state-backed drive for technological self-reliance, pouring billions into homegrown semiconductor development. The hook here is unmistakable. Whoever controls the flow of these critical technologies controls the next chapter of global economic leadership. Currency moves form another front in this silent war. The dollar has long been the undisputed global reserve currency, giving Washington extraordinary power over international finance. China's push to internationalize the yuan through trade agreements, currency swaps, and the creation of alternative payment systems represents a direct challenge to that dominance. The more global trade and investment settle in yuan rather than dollars, the less leverage the United States has to use sanctions or financial restrictions as instruments of foreign policy. This subtle but profound shift has already encouraged other nations to diversify their reserves and question the durability of dollar supremacy. And in the shadows of these maneuvers, global markets quiver, knowing that even small shifts in reserve preferences can destabilize everything from interest rates to commodity prices. Technology is perhaps the most captivating arena of this economic conflict. From artificial intelligence to quantum computing and next generation telecommunications, both nations understand that leadership in these fields is not merely about innovation, it is about setting the standards and architectures upon which the future global economy will be built. The U.S. has tightened export controls and pressured allies to restrict Chinese access to cutting edge research, while China has expanded its own state led investments and forged partnerships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America to ensure that its technological ecosystem cannot be isolated. Every breakthrough, every patent, every strategic partnership is a move in a high stakes chess game for dominance in the industries that will define the century. This economic confrontation has already sent shockwaves through global supply chains, raising costs and sowing uncertainty for businesses and workers everywhere. Multinational corporations must now navigate a landscape where a single policy announcement can reconfigure sourcing strategies and where geopolitical risk is as central to operations as efficiency or profit. Investors react to every headline, markets swing wildly, and ordinary people feel the impact in the form of higher prices, delayed goods, and volatile job markets. The essential hook is that this war is fought not with armies, but with algorithms, tariffs, and currency swaps. It is a war in which economic tools have become strategic weapons, where the balance of power is measured not by territory gained, but by market share, technological dominance, and financial influence. And as both Washington and Beijing double down, the world watches a contest that will determine not only who leads in the coming decades, but also how the very rules of global commerce will be written. The shockwaves radiating from the U.S. China confrontation are no longer confined to policy circles or stock exchanges. They have reached the everyday realities of workers, consumers, and governments across the globe. The hook that demands attention is that this is not merely a clash of two superpowers. It is a tremor shaking the foundations of the entire global economy. Every tariff, every technological embargo, every strategic countermove sends ripples far beyond Washington and Beijing, creating a chain reaction that touches households and boardrooms from Sao Paulo to Seoul. What was once an abstract rivalry between giants has become a living force that distorts supply chains, rattles currencies, and reshapes the future of globalization itself. One need only look at the world's supply networks to see the magnitude of the disruption. For decades, companies relied on the efficiency of a tightly knit global system where components were manufactured in multiple countries and assembled wherever labor and logistics costs were lowest. The US China economic conflict has shattered the illusion of stability in that system. Tariffs on Chinese goods force multinational firms to reconsider the cost of production, while export controls on advanced technologies compel companies to seek alternative suppliers or to invest in costly domestic manufacturing. This is not a temporary detour. It is a structural reordering of how the world makes and moves its products. From automotive parts to pharmaceuticals, sudden bottlenecks and price spikes remind every nation that a trade war between the two largest economies can upend the daily rhythm of commerce. Inflation is another ripple that cannot be ignored. When supply chains seize up and tariffs raise the cost of imported goods, prices climb everywhere. Consumers in Europe feel it when electronics become more expensive. Families in Africa experience it when essential goods shipped through Asian ports face delays and higher freight costs. Inflationary pressure is no longer simply the outcome of domestic monetary policy. It has become the byproduct of geopolitical rivalry. Central banks, already struggling to tame post pandemic price surges, find themselves caught between the need to stabilize currencies and the unpredictable swings caused by a conflict far beyond their control. This is the hidden tax of the US China standoff, the cost of uncertainty borne by ordinary people around the world. The financial markets, too, have turned into arenas of volatility. Investors react instantly to any sign of escalation, whether a new round of tariffs, a semiconductor embargo, or a tense diplomatic exchange. Stock indices swing, currencies fluctuate, and capital flows shift as portfolio managers attempt to hedge against the risk of sudden shocks. Emerging economies, heavily dependent on foreign investment and export markets, are particularly vulnerable. A single policy announcement in Washington or Beijing can send their currencies tumbling or drain billions from their bond markets overnight. For many developing nations, this is not just market noise. It is a destabilizing force that complicates debt repayments, strains public budgets, and undermines economic planning. And yet, perhaps the most profound impact is not captured in statistics, but in the psychological transformation of globalization itself. For decades, the world operated under the belief that economic interdependence was a stabilizing force, that the more nations traded with one another, the less likely they were to engage in open conflict. The US China confrontation has fractured that belief. Governments now speak openly of decoupling, of building friend-shored supply chains, of creating regional trade blocs insulated from geopolitical risk. This language signals more than strategic caution. It marks the end of an era in which globalization was treated as an irreversible tide. The hook here is stark. The very principle that economic ties would safeguard peace is now in doubt, replaced by a scramble to secure national interests in an increasingly fragmented world economy. What emerges is a landscape where uncertainty is the new normal. Whether you are a small manufacturer in Southeast Asia, a farmer in South America, or a tech entrepreneur in Europe, the consequences of the US China confrontation reach you. Prices you pay, markets you sell to, and investments you depend on are all shaped by a rivalry you did not choose but cannot escape. This is the true shockwave and invisible, pervasive force that redefines the rules of trade and finance, leaving no corner of the global economy untouched. At the heart of the intensifying US China rivalry lies a deeper, more unsettling truth. The conflict is not simply about national pride, political ideology, or even territorial ambition. It is rooted in the very mechanics of the global economic system. Here is the hook that should immediately command attention: capitalism itself, with its relentless demand for growth and competition, sets the stage for confrontation between great powers, making clashes like this less an accident of history and more an inevitable consequence of the system's own internal logic. To grasp the stakes of this moment, one must look beyond headlines about trade wars or military maneuvers and instead examine the economic engine that compels nations to compete even when cooperation would serve humanity far better. Capitalism operates on a simple, unyielding imperative: expand or be overtaken. Every firm, every industry, and ultimately every nation inside the global capitalist framework is pushed to capture markets, secure resources, and outpace rivals, or face decline. For decades, the United States reaped the benefits of being the dominant economic power, enjoying unrivaled access to markets, controlling the global reserve currency, and setting the rules of international trade. But capitalism does not allow any player to remain unchallenged forever. China's extraordinary rise, built on a hybrid model of state planning and market incentives, has proven that another path to capitalist success exists. By harnessing massive state-directed investment, mobilizing a vast labor force, and strategically adopting and innovating technology, China has closed the gap with the United States far faster than most economists once believed possible. That very success, celebrated by millions for lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty, has triggered the competitive reflexes of the system itself. When two economic giants share the same imperative to grow, their ambitions inevitably collide. It is not simply that the United States fears losing its global supremacy. It is that the entire capitalist order rewards whoever commands the most profitable markets and the most advanced technologies. Whether in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, or green energy, leadership means not only economic advantage, but also the power to write the rules that others must follow. This is why Washington's restrictions on high-end chips or Beijing's push for self-sufficiency are not isolated policies. They are expressions of a deeper system wide struggle where each side must either dominate or risk being dominated. The hook here is as sharp as it is alarming. Capitalism pits even the most interdependent nations against one another, making conflict the logical outcome of its own competitive design. This dynamic explains why appeals to diplomacy, though necessary, can never fully remove the underlying tension. Negotiations may ease tariffs or open new channels of communication, but they cannot neutralize the structural pressure that drives both countries to compete. Both economies depend on constant growth to maintain domestic stability, China to sustain its promise of rising living standards, the United States to uphold its political and financial leadership. If either slows too much, it risks unemployment, social unrest, and political upheaval. Growth is not merely desirable, it is the lifeblood of the system, and it forces each side to look outward for markets, resources, and strategic dominance. The result is a rivalry that transcends culture, ideology, or even the personal choices of leaders. It is not about whether Chinese communism can coexist with American democracy. Both countries operate within a global capitalist system that demands winners and punishes those who fall behind. History offers a cautionary hook when rising and established powers have faced one another in a world defined by competitive expansion. From Britain and Germany in the early 20th century to the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, conflict, whether economic or military, has often followed. Today's US-China tension is thus a symptom of a larger disease, a global economy organized around relentless competition. As long as that system remains intact, the rivalry will not simply fade with a change in leadership or a clever treaty. It will persist because the forces driving it are structural, embedded in the DNA of capitalism itself. And until the world confronts that deeper reality, every truce will be temporary and every period of calm only a pause before the next surge of confrontation.